All right, so I used to help this buddy of mine with his property in the Florida Everglades every now and then. This wasn't your everyday property, mind you. It was a gigantic gator farm, smack dab in the middle of nowhere. I think he's got about 500 acres, give or take, all swamp and marshlands, and it's so far out, it's practically in Cuba. Now he's got about a dozen gator ponds scattered across his property. If you aren't familiar with gator farming, the whole idea is to breed them, raise them, and then sell them. People pay top dollar for gator meat and even more for the hides. Anyway, long story short, his farmhand up and quits one day and he needed some help running the place. So I thought, why not? And I ended up down there for a couple weeks. There were 12 gator ponds and 12 watchtowers across his farm, all of them filled with these massive, scary-looking gators. Part of my job was to do a head count every morning and evening, make sure none of them had wandered off or eaten each other. Every gator was tagged and tracked, and the price my buddy got for each one depended on their size and age. He had some real monsters in those ponds, let me tell you. One evening, I'm making my rounds about 6 p.m., just as the sun's starting to go down. The ponds are quiet. The gators are all settling in for the night. I'm counting heads, making sure everyone's accounted for. Just as I'm finishing up, the sun sets and it gets real dark real fast. You know how it is in the winter. Sun goes down early, and there I am in the middle of the Everglades, surrounded by gators in the pitch black. I was about to call it a night when I heard this strange noise coming from behind one of the towers. Now, gators make all sorts of noises, but this was different. It wasn't the usual low grumble of a gator. It was something else, something I'd never heard before. I tried to shine my flashlight out towards the noise, see if I could catch any eye shine in the swamp, but I didn't see anything. I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, but then the noise got louder. I tried to shine my light again, but it was too dim to see anything. I'd forgotten to charge it, and the battery was about to die. I was standing there in the dark, in the middle of a gator farm, with some strange noise getting louder and louder. Just when I was about to say forget it and leave, I heard it again, louder this time, and it definitely wasn't a gator. It was this eerie humming sound, vibrating the air around me, and it sounded threatening, in a way I can't really explain. Whatever was making that noise, it was out there in the dark, moving around, and it wasn't a gator. Now, I've heard stories about things in the Everglades, stories about big cats, panthers, things like that. But this didn't sound like any cat I've ever heard. The sound was like a vibration, and then it would turn into a kind of hissing noise. I decided right then and there to stay put in the tower and not risk running into whatever was out there in the dark. I always enjoyed helping my friend with his farm, but that night, I got more than I bargained for. As I sat there in the tower, that strange sound was getting louder and louder, and I was getting more and more freaked out. I tried to look out into the darkness, but with the moon just a sliver in the sky, it was almost impossible to see anything. But then, I saw something moving just outside the tower. Now I know this is going to sound nuts even to me, and I was the one who saw it. The thing moving around was massive, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, and it didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. It looked like a cross between a human and, I don't know, some kind of prehistoric animal. It had a head that looked like a snake's. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I was looking at something that didn't belong in this world, not in any world I knew at least. I tried to keep my breathing steady while I watched this creature moving back and forth out there in the dark. Its eyes were glowing, a sickly yellow color, and even though I couldn't see much else, I knew this thing was smart and dangerous. It was searching for something, and I had a sinking feeling that something was me. As the minutes turned into hours, I stayed hidden in the tower, praying this creature would lose interest and move on. But I had a feeling it knew I was there, and I didn't know how much longer I could stay hidden. I was kicking myself for not bringing a gun with me. I stayed crouched down, only daring to peek out every once in a while. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it stop and start sniffing the air. That's when something shot out from the undergrowth and started squealing. It was a wild boar, and the creature went after it like a bolt of lightning. The poor thing was squealing like mad, and then silence. It had been caught. I took that opportunity to make a run for it, to my truck parked about 100 yards away, and I drove out of there like the devil himself was chasing me. When I finally got back to my room, I was completely drained. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, going over and over in my mind what I'd seen, what it could have been. All I knew was I wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. The next morning, I called my friend and told him, "Look, I don't know what the heck is on your property, but I'm not sticking around to find out." So I left. I packed up my stuff and I drove away from that place as fast as I could. And let me tell you, I haven't been back since. I don't know what that thing was, and I don't really want to know. All I know is it's something I don't ever want to run into again. I mean, I've seen a lot of things in my life, but that was something else. Something from a nightmare. And it wasn't just the sight of it, it was the feeling it gave me. Like I was prey, you know? Like I was being hunted. But anyway, that's my story. I don't know if you believe it or not, but it's true. Every word of it. You can choose to believe me or not, but I know what I saw, and I know I don't ever want to see it again. You know, I used to think those tales about cryptozoological creatures were all just tall tales, pure imagination. I mean, my little sister's obsessed with all those documentaries on TV about Bigfoot, Nessie, Chupacabra, you name it. I'd be trying to hammer out an essay for English class, and I'd hear these wild accounts blaring from the living room. I got to tell you, though, the joke's on me. I'm a believer now. I had a run-in of my own, and boy do I feel stupid for doubting all those stories. Now here I am sharing my own encounter, and let me tell you, it's as real as it gets. This actually happened to me. So I just started working this new job at a 24-hour diner a couple of months ago. That's why I was up at all hours, since my shifts sometimes ended late into the night. Technically, I'm not supposed to be out in the woods past dark, but my parents weren't too fussed, and I figured no park ranger would really care. I was coming back from a late shift. We'd had a real rush around 2 a.m., truckers and all, and by the time I was heading home, it was nearly dawn. I had just dropped off a coworker whose place I'd never been to before. I was full of confidence, telling them it was no biggie when in reality, I wasn't sure how to get back to the main road from their house. Well, just my luck. I didn't know the way and I got myself lost. I felt like a real dunce for getting lost, but hey, that's life, right? Took a wrong turn somewhere and ended up on this really old trail that led deeper into the woods. I was looking for a clear spot to turn around in, but all I saw was a narrow, winding path with dense undergrowth on either side. Just a bunch of old trees and the occasional deer crossing the path, not much else. So there I was, driving and feeling more and more uneasy, and that's when things went from 0 to 100 real quick. I saw this figure on the road ahead and thought it was just another deer. Sure, I thought it was a bit strange that the eyes were glowing a bright green, but I didn't really think much of it. I've seen some deer with reflective eyes at night, so I figured it was just one of those guys. As I got closer, things were definitely getting weirder. I could now see that it wasn't just a deer. This thing was standing upright on 2 legs, its eyes still glowing that eerie green. The figure didn't move away as I approached, which was even more odd. So now I'm thinking it's probably just some prankster in a costume, trying to scare late-night drivers. But the figure remained still as a statue as I got closer, which gave me the creeps. As I neared, I started to really freak out because I could see it wasn't a human at all. Like, it was way too tall and its body looked all wrong. I was pretty sure I was about to crash into this thing. I wanted to veer to the side, but I was too shocked to move. Just when I thought I was going to hit this creature, I made the decision to swerve off the trail. But right before I swerved, the thing just disappeared. Like, one moment it was there, and then it was gone. My car has a sunroof, so I could see it wasn't on the road anymore, or in the trees above. So obviously what I almost hit was not a human or a deer, because it disappeared into thin air and left no trace behind. It must have been incredibly fast because one moment it was right there in front of me, and the next, it was just gone. Because I was so close, I could tell that it was really tall. and that's why its eyes were so high off the ground. I couldn't really make out the shape of it because it was dark and basically a shadow. It was just tall and dark, and those glowing green eyes, that's all I could really see. I sat in my car with it in park for what felt like forever. My heart was thudding in my chest, and I was trying to steady my breathing. I made a U-turn right there on the trail. It was more of a three-point turn, really, and drove back the way I came. Somehow I eventually found my way home from there. The entire drive back, I was just scanning the trees for those glowing eyes, but I didn't see anything. Once I got home, I immediately tried to look up what I saw on the internet. Some people think that these creatures are just misidentified animals or optical illusions, and that's what people see. I'm not so sure about that. This creature, or whatever it was, moved like no animal I've ever seen. I'm not an expert, but I don't know how any animal could have disappeared like that thing did. So that's my story. Like I said, I thought all these tales were just made up, and then I experienced it for myself. At the very least, it was all really strange, and I have no clue what I saw. I'm just telling myself that it was some kind of rare animal, because if it wasn't, that really makes me question a lot of what I thought I knew about the world. They never see the monster coming, do they? I always thought that was the weird part of these stories. It's always out of the blue, an unexpected sighting. Not for me, not exactly. I didn't see it coming per se, but I knew it was there. I was looking for it, and I had a trail to follow. There are reports in the southern United States of a large ape-like creature. The details vary as much as the legitimacy of each claim. When enough of those stories line up, however, that's when I investigate. There's a team of us, but normally these preliminary investigations are done solo. It's quicker and cheaper to send one team member on a plane than it is to pack up the entire institution. If one thing is true about our government, they're penny pinchers. If the initial search discovers some additional proof, or if the fallout from the reported sightings escalates too high, then more people are dispatched to the location. Those people came after my encounter. They came, they searched, and they found something just like I did. I can't speak to their journey, though. Just know at the end of all this, I'm confident that the thing I saw was taken away in a cage. I was following up on reports of the ape beast in a stretch of Texas woods. A hiker had been scared half to death, and an off-duty fireman had seen something indescribable through the scope of his hunting rifle. The two reports wouldn't have seemed related at all, except for one specific detail. They described a stench. They described an acidic, earthy smell that made their throats sweat and their lungs curdle. I picked up that same aroma as I ventured into the woods. I found a few hair samples, long strands plucked by the trees and brush. The scent was coming from these strands. Eventually, one of the clusters of hair was near enough to a large animal trail that I thought just maybe it would be the path of the beast. I got lucky. The longer I followed it, the stronger the smell became. That's how I knew I was close. I wrapped a handkerchief around my face to smother out the scent. It was burning my eyes and turning my stomach. I knew I had to continue, even if it was getting hard to breathe. It embarrasses me to admit it, but eventually I gagged. I choked and vomited onto the ground, adding the odor of my own bile to the stink in the woods. I braced myself against a tree and wiped my mouth with my sleeve. When I reached for my water bottle, hoping to rinse the taste from my mouth, that's when it appeared. It didn't surprise me. It didn't catch me off guard. If I was emptying the contents of my stomach, I was confident that I was practically on top of the thing. The sound of my retching must have drawn it out. When the plastic brim of the bottle reached my lips, I saw it standing nearby. It loomed between the trees, ducking its head to avoid getting its hair tangled in the branches hanging from above. It cleared 7 foot easy. I wish I could say it watched me and then vanished, but the ape beast was unhappy with how close I'd come. Its face was twisted in a snarl, narrowing its beady eyes and curling its lip to reveal massive canine teeth. Its flat nose flexed with every heaving breath. At the time, I couldn't imagine what had upset it. I must have been in its territory, was all I could think. It wanted me out, plain and simple. And with my own sighting as fuel, I knew I could leave and come back with an entire team of capable hunters and trackers. I turned and ran. I heard its footfalls strike the ground like a sledgehammer smacking concrete. It roared loudly and closed in. I wasn't going to let it catch, but I'd be lying if I said that I didn't feel its breath on my neck. The air from its mouth was so hot that it practically burned my skin. A rash broke out on my shoulders a few days later. I can't imagine what kind of bacteria was living on that thing. I stuck to the paths I knew would be too narrow for its massive body. After its shoulders struck more than a few trees, it slowed down. I lost it, and slowly but surely the scent faded. I caught my breath and collapsed in my car, stripping away my outer layers and tossing them out the window. I was covered in the stink, and it wasn't letting me breathe. I wondered if that was its purpose. If you can't breathe, you can't run. That's one way to gain advantage over your prey. Within the next 2 days, the full team was dispatched. Local news outlets were informed that a sick bear was caught in the woods and would be taken in for treatment. Sick bears are the usual explanation. Something that struck me as odd, however, is where the bear was supposedly caught. I was assured privately that it was the beast I saw, and I knew I couldn't be told the absolute truth due to the nature of our job, but the animal was caught miles away from my encounter. If it had been so eager to protect its territory when it spotted me nearby, why was it suddenly so keen to leave? Why had it traveled so far in such a short amount of time? You see, I want to end this story on a positive note. The institution I work for does a great job at keeping these wild areas safe. But sometimes we do overlook the details. For me, this territory is one of those details. If it was protecting its kin, for instance, and wanted to lead us away from its family. So I had this buddy named Dale. He used to live in the bustling city of Chicago, but he decided to move out to the wilds of Alaska. The nature, the wildlife, the fresh air, and all that, you know. Now Dale, he'd always been a city boy, so moving to a cabin in Alaska, that was a whole new world for him. His uncle had left him this cabin in his will. Dale thought it was a good chance to start fresh, you know. So he packed up his life, left his job, said goodbye to the Chicago deep dish pizzas, and off he went. He'd visited the cabin a few times before, of course. Every now and then when he got some vacation time. But living there? That was a whole other story. When Dale got there, it was pretty much how he remembered it. The log cabin, the lake nearby, the dense forest around. He started settling in, getting the cabin up and running. One thing Dale loved about the cabin was the beautiful view of the lake. He'd sit on the porch, drink his coffee, and just watch the stillness of the water. It was peaceful. But one day, he noticed something off. There were usually ducks and other birds on the lake. That day, though, it was empty. Quiet. Like they'd all decided to take a vacation or something. He shrugged it off. Probably just a bad day for the birds or something, he thought. The next day, Dale noticed the same thing. No ducks, no birds, nothing. The lake was still like glass. That was strange. It got him thinking, got him worrying. He felt something was off, but couldn't quite put his finger on it. Dale decided to walk around the lake, see if he could find any signs of what was going on. That's when he noticed these weird tracks. Kind of like a bird's tracks, but much bigger. And claws, like a big bird. A really big bird. Dale got back to the cabin and couldn't help but think. Get a camera, he remembered his buddy from Chicago saying once when they were discussing wildlife spotting. He found an old one in his uncle's stuff. He'd used it for hunting or something. He decided to set up the camera near the lake. By the time he was done, it was getting late. He headed back to the cabin. The next morning, he went out to the lake. The camera was knocked over. The tracks were there again. But this time there was something else. Feathers. Big black feathers. And lots of them. Dale felt a chill run down his spine. He picked up the camera and headed back to the cabin. He had a feeling that he was about to discover something big. So, Dale, he gets back to the cabin. He hooks up the camera to his laptop. He's not exactly tech savvy, but he manages. The camera had a bit of footage before it got knocked over. Now, the footage, it was all normal at first. The still lake, the occasional gust of wind, but then, late at night, something appeared. It was big. It moved like a bird, but it was too big to be a bird. It seemed to be looking for something around the lake, and then it got closer to the camera. And then, bam! The screen goes blank. The camera was knocked over, but Dale managed to freeze the frame just before the camera got knocked over. And what he saw, it sent chills down his spine. The creature, it had the face of a bird, a beak, but it also had these sharp teeth and the eyes. They were glowing, even in the black and white footage. Dale sat there staring at the frozen image. He didn't know what to think. He didn't know what to do. He was a city boy, after all. This was way out of his league. Dale finally shook himself out of it. He decided he had to do something. He couldn't just sit there and do nothing. He decided to call the local wildlife officer, someone who might know what this creature was, or at least he hoped they would. Dale tried to explain what he saw. The big bird-like creature, the tracks, the feathers. He sent them the footage. The wildlife officer was stumped too. He'd never seen anything like it. He promised to look into it and let Dale know if he found anything. That night, Dale couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the creature, the big bird with teeth. He wondered if it would come back. He wondered what it wanted. And then he heard it. A loud, strange call. It was coming from the lake. So, Dale, he hears this call. It's unlike anything he's ever heard before. Like a bird's screech, but deeper. More ominous. He couldn't just sit there. He grabs a flashlight and steps outside. The night was darker than usual. Clouds blocking out the moonlight. He walks towards the lake, the call getting louder. As he nears the lake, he sees it. The creature, it's there. Just by the water's edge. It was bigger than he'd thought. Taller than him, even. Its feathers were black, shiny under the weak flashlight. It turned around and Dale. He couldn't help but freeze. It was the creature from the footage, but seeing it up close, it was much more terrifying. The beak, the teeth, the glowing eyes. Dale slowly backed away, not taking his eyes off the creature. It seemed to be watching him, curious, but it didn't move towards him. Dale made it back to the cabin, his heart pounding. He spent the night awake, listening to the creature's call, wondering what it was, what it wanted. The next day, Dale decided to head into town. He needed to talk to someone, the wildlife officer, or anyone who would listen. In town, folks looked at him like he was crazy, a giant bird creature. In their small, quiet town, he couldn't blame them. He would have thought the same. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, days turned into weeks. Dale kept seeing the creature. At night by the lake. It never threatened him. Just stayed by the lake, doing whatever it was doing. Dale didn't understand it, but he decided to coexist. He started to document the creature, its habits, its calls. He even gave it a name, Ravenous. After its raven-like appearance, he started to feel less afraid, more curious. What was Ravenous? Why was it here? Was it alone? So many questions. Dale knew he was in the middle of something big. Something most people wouldn't believe. But he had the proof. The footage, the photos. The giant bird creature of the Alaskan lake. Ravenous. He decided to share his discovery. He reached out to wildlife experts, bird watchers, anyone who might be interested. He knew it would be hard for people to believe him, but he had to try. So Dale, he's reaching out to all these people. He's sharing his story, his footage, his observations. He's hoping someone would take him seriously. But all he gets are dismissals. It was disheartening. Okay, so here's the thing. I'm just an average guy, nothing special about me really. Live in a suburb just outside of Atlanta. Not a city dweller, but far from a country bumpkin too. I guess you could say I'm comfortably in the middle. Now, I'm not going to name the place. I mean, you'll have to forgive me for that, but the fewer folks who can trace this back to me, the better, right? I hope you get where I'm coming from. All right, so you know how these stories usually start off with some sort of landmark, right? In this case, let's say the landmark is the old water tower. For a long time, it was the heart of the town, pumping life into our homes until it was abandoned. Now it just stands there all rusty and silent like a ghost of our past. But the thing is, that's not what this story is about. I mean, sure, the water tower is important, but the real focus is on what happened there about 15 years ago. See, there was this time when people around town started talking about something weird happening at the water tower. Strange lights, odd noises, the kind of thing you'd expect in one of those late-night paranormal TV shows. And then, out of nowhere, the water tower just collapsed, just like that. No warning, no signs, just fell to the ground one night. And the strange thing is, no one could figure out why. Well, maybe that's not entirely true. Some folks, the ones who saw the lights and heard the noises, they said it was because of some creature. Now, I know what you're thinking. A creature? Really? But the thing is, I saw it too. And it wasn't any animal I'd ever seen before. It was like a large shadow shifting and changing, sort of like those Rorschach ink blots you see in movies. And the eyes, those glowing red eyes, they'd pierce right through you. After the tower fell, the creature just vanished, like it had never been there at all, but I remember it. I remember what I saw. Now here's where things get a bit weird. I've been working at the local library for a while now. I know, not the most exciting job, but it pays the bills. And every once in a while I get to go through old newspaper clippings. So, a couple of months back, I was going through some stuff about the water tower, and there it was, a report about our shadow creature. The report was chilling. It read, "I thought there was a wild dog in my backyard, but when I went out to see, it wasn't a dog. It was this huge shadow, constantly changing its form, and those red eyes, they stared right at me." That's not all, though. When I tried to find the person who had written the report, I found out they had died a few days after the water tower collapsed, and that's not the only one. Every single person who had reported seeing the creature, they were all gone. Accidents, illnesses, you name it. It was like they had been cursed. So here I am wondering about this creature, wondering if it had something to do with the water tower, wondering if I'm next. I mean, I want to know more. I want to find out the truth. But what if that means I'll end up like the others? What do you think? I mean, should I dig deeper? Should I let someone else know about this? Or should I just keep my head down and forget all about it? There's a reason why people stopped talking about the creature, right? There's a reason why it was forgotten, and maybe I don't want to know that reason.